Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining our webinar. You know, the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are multi-dimensional days. On the one hand, they're days of repentance, they're days of remorse, they're days of feeling sorry about the past. But on the other hand, they're days of excitement. It's about starting anew. It's about saying yes to a better year. Now, there's nobody better to teach us and to share with us on how to say yes to a better year than my good friend, Rabbi David Eliezrie. He's the Chabad emissary in Orange County, California. He's author of the best-selling book, Secret of Chabad. He's on the international Kinus, Hashluchim and JLI advisory board. And he's also Chabad's liaison to the Jewish Federations of North America. He appears often on radio and television, and he certainly is a powerhouse. And Rabbi Eliezrie, thank you for making the time.
Well, it's morning here, so we're still awake.
And we look so forward to hearing you. So I'm going to pass over to you. Thank you.
My pleasure to pass all the way from Johannesburg to California. It's so special to be talking to people. I had a wonderful visit there about 2.5 years ago. It was really remarkable to see such a vibrant and dynamic Jewish community, really where Judaism is celebrated with a sense of excitement. I think it's one of the most remarkable Jewish communities in the world. And it's an honor to be with you again today as we begin in this intermediate time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's a time of retrospection. And as Rabbi Eliezrie said so beautifully, it's a time we have to hope for a better year. Because let me tell you, this has been a really strange kind of year because we still haven't come out of the woods here in the corona crisis. I don't know exactly what's going on in South Africa, but in California, at least in my community, we're allowed to have small minyanim inside and big services outside. And we had actually Rosh Hashanah. We did a minyan inside for our traditional crowd, and we had a lot of people come to blowing the shofar in a big open tent that we put up, and I'm planning again for Yom Kippur. But it's been a very confusing times, and you know, we remember those days when the whole shutdowns began. For us in America, it was back in March. You know, it was a time that when you went to the supermarket and you tried to get a little bit of, you wanted to get some napkins or some toilet paper, people were exchanging them for timeshares. Things were a lot different. And we've all been on this corona coaster. You know, we started our daily workouts, making banana bread, and we went for long walks. And the next day you're crying that you can't even see your friend that you really don't want to see so much. And you know what it's really been good for? Introverts. They love it. They sit home at home. They think it's Purim every day. They have a wonderful time. Everything is so good. For them, it's been the best medicine. But for this year, you know, the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, coming in Yom Kippur, it all became early. Why? Because when we started with Corona, we had to hit the pause button. And what the high holidays are about is that pause button. It's about sitting back for a few moments, reflecting what's going on in our lives, and trying to navigate where we need to improve, what we need not to improve, what we need to do. But for most of us, it already started in March. So now when we're starting it really, Rosh Hashanah came and Yom Kippur will be in a few days, we really got to put our focus in a good way. And we have to realize something very, very important. The Lubavitcher Rebbe once said that time is not a train of cars hitched to one another, where one year is dragged along by another. Everyone is special. In fact, on Rosh Hashanah, we blew the shofar. After we sound the shofar, we say the words, Hayoim Hara Selam. Today is the birth of the world. In other words, today we have a whole new beginning. So now we're a few days into that new beginning. Rosh Hashanah we just observed a few days ago. It's a totally new energy, a totally new excitement, a totally new vibration, and totally new opportunities. So we have to get ourselves ready. We got ourselves tuned in to that new energy, and we got to welcome the blessings that are going to come in our lives, which hopefully are going to be. Still, it's in the last year, the three main essentials we have in our lives, our health, our prosperity, and our freedom, were all under attack. And we thought things are going to vanish in a moment. Who expected, suddenly you have to be home, you can't go to work, suddenly you can't talk to your friends. Zoom. Would you believe that popular rabbis from California will be speaking to people in South Africa? Used to get on a plane. I came 2.5 years ago. I had to fly to come to Johannesburg. It's not exactly around the corner from California. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity to come back again. And it was I was welcomed so beautifully by Rabbi Eliezrie, by the community. It was really a very special experience to be there. But we've been living through difficult times, and we had times of absolute terror, people in emergency rooms. I had my son-in-law's brother spent 20 days on a respirator. Thank God he's doing so much better. It was a chaotic time. But now, and somebody want to say that's the new normal. And guess what? We have to hope that all of that's going to change, because really what's happened is we used to go around all the time thinking, oh, we know what's going to be. And what Corona taught us is that there's a degree of uncertainty in our lives. We used to think, oh, we are controlling everything. You get into your car, you turn on the car, and you got 18 speakers playing the latest song in Spotify. When I was in South Africa last time, I went to Kruger National Park. I saw the epitome of what's happening. I was driving around Kruger, listening to Yoram Gaon singing in Israel, Ahar Sofim. You figure, you're driving in a car looking at the wild animals, and you're listening to a song from Israel. You feel comfortable, you feel secure, as long as you don't get out of the car, because I was told one place there was a pride of lions. I said, what happens if we get out? He says, you're not going to get back in. But nevertheless, we had this sense of certainty. Now that sense of uncertainty has come about. And you know something? It's been an illusion, because we all know that we're dependent on God above. And maybe that understanding of that sense of uncertainty is good, because we know that, guess what? We don't run the whole world. God is running the world. And out of this sense of understanding that God is running this world, it can break us a greater sense of reality and understand who we are dependent upon. And God is going to shower us with our blessings. And one of the most important ideas here is to realize that when we face a challenge in our life, it's not by random occurrence, but rather by divine providence. And it may be confusing why we're going through this and why we're not going through this. And I don't know exactly what the extent of the restrictions are now in South Africa. You know, every country is a little bit different. But what it really is telling us something important is that we should realize we are dependent about the ones above. And the question is, what can we learn from this whole experience? And one of the most interesting things about this is this tumult over masks. I know whenever I go out in public now, I go into a store, I put on a mask. When I walk down the street, if I go sometimes bike riding in the morning, I don't wear a mask because it's an open area. But when I go into a store or any public place, I have to wear a mask. Now, and some people love masks, some people don't love masks, some people think it's a political agenda here in America. But nevertheless, we have to ask ourselves, what is the lesson that we can learn from wearing a mask? Because when you think about it, a mask is not about protecting you. A mask is not there for you. It's there for you to protect others, because if, God forbid, you're carrying this disease, and there's many people that are carrying it, and thank God, they're not even sick at all, and you don't even realize it. And if you breathe out those particles and you don't have a mask, you could infect somebody else. The mask is about taking care of other people. The mask is about having responsibility for somebody beyond ourselves. And here is a very powerful lesson that we can learn from this whole terrible tragedy. That one of the best ways we can change the destiny of mankind is by acting not to protect ourselves, because a mask doesn't protect us, but to protect others. And this is a very powerful idea in Judaism about the sense of responsibility that we have for another human being, and a sense of collective responsibility we have important for Jewish people, and collective responsibility we have for the people in Israel, and the collective responsibility we have for our families. And when we have that sense of responsibility and that connection, then God looks upon us. He says, look, he comes and he showers upon us our blessings. We saw actually a quite amazing blessing last week, this amazing peace treaty that was done between Israel and the Arab states. Who would have imagined? The whole world said, you can't do anything with anybody unless you deal with the Palestinians. And personally, I think that the Palestinian state would be a danger to Israel. And here we see a bunch of Arab states getting aligned with Israel because they have a common enemy of Iran, and they're willing to work together with Israel. I spoke to the rabbi in Dubai yesterday. They had kosher slaughter in Dubai yesterday. You can buy kosher meat. There's a kosher restaurant in the highest rated hotel in the world, the 7 Stars Hotel. I don't forgot the name of it. It's like fanciest hotel in the universe. So we're seeing that we are showered with many blessings. But the question is, how do we face those challenges in life? How do we relate to them? And how do we learn to make from them blessings? So I want to share with you two important stories that I think really bring out this idea. Many of us are acquainted. All of us are acquainted with Apple. It seems like the company that took all over the world. But many of us are acquainted with the personality of Steve Jobs, who was the founder of Apple. Interestingly enough, Steve Jobs faced three great moments of tragedy in his life, which turned out to be moments of transformation. Three times when he thought everything came to an end, and in a sense, it gave him an important lesson in life. And he gave a speech about this in Stanford many years ago, which has been watched almost 50 million times on YouTube. But there's a very important story and a lesson that we can learn from all of this. He went off to a place called Reed College here in California. It's not the biggest college in the world, but here in the United States, college tuition is a major deal. And the parents saved up and they prepared and they're going to send their kid to college. And they send him off to Reed College. He's there for a few months. He says, I'm not interested. He drops out of school. His parents are all upset with him. How could you drop out of school? You have to go to college. You got to become educated. So he decided to take the one single course that interested him. So here he is. He drops out of school. He's not interested in college. It's a low point in his life. He decides to take one course. Of all courses, what does Reed College offer? Calligraphy. Now, I don't know why a university offers a course in calligraphy, but he studied calligraphy. And he said later on, when he invented Apple, the first Macs, the first computers that came out, it was that college course in calligraphy that taught him about the concepts of design. And we all know this kind of elegant, minimalist design, which we have on Apple products. I'm talking to you from an Apple iPad. We all know about that style. Where did it come from? At the low point of Steve Jobs' life, after he leaves college, he takes one course, and it teaches him what he needs to know about how he is going to design the future of computers with Apple computers coming into the world. So he goes into Apple, and things are moving along very nicely, but there's conflict. And he's not the easiest character to get along with. If you read his biography, you can realize he's, as they say, nicht kein geringer Mensch, as they say in Yiddish. He's not such an easy guy, not such a big sweetheart. In 1985, they fire him from Apple. At this point, he's again at a low point of his life. You might think, okay, he's going to throw in the towel. He's going to give up. He's going to say, you know what? That's it. I made a few bucks. I'll go sleep at the Riviera. I have a few dollars. He had stocks. He had this. He had that. I'm sure he was financially. There was nothing to talk about. He could support Rabbi Misinter's miracle drive from here to the ends of the universe. He could make it 10 times bigger. And knowing Rabbi Misinter, if he has a miracle drive is this size this year, he wants to make it twice as much next year. I want to wish him a blessing that he should double the miracle drive. It should be a double miracle, so to speak, for this year. But Steve Jobs, what does he do? He creates a new company called Next. At another company called Pixar. Here he is, depressed, about to throw in the towel. He says, you know what, I'm going to start all over again. He's at a low point of his life. And after a while, what does Apple do? It buys these companies. And what happens to Steve Jobs? He starts off again. He's now the head of Apple. So from the low, he goes to the high, and then he even goes higher. And the third moment in his life, which is really a tragic moment, was when he discovered he had cancer. And he told the students at Stanford something very important, that this gave him a very, very vital lesson in life. And this is what he said. He says, if today was the last day you'd want to do what you do, if today was the last day, would you want to do what you are about to do? Time is limited. You know what? Time is a very valuable commodity. It just goes through every day. You wake up in the morning, you have your cup of coffee, you go to shul, you daven, you have your friends, you go to work, and we don't realize the value of time. And Steve Jobs told the audience at Stanford University, all these young students ready to burst out to go to the world with their new ideas, they need to understand the value of time. And time is a very important commodity. And from that, he learned that third very important lesson. And that's a lesson we all need to know, because time is limited and we need to use it to the fullest extent and ask ourselves. But what happened to Jobs is every moment he reached a low point, instead of throwing in the towel, instead of giving it up, he used that as a point of inspiration to pursue his life further. And this is what we need to do with the tragedy that we're doing now. We need to realize that this should be an opportunity for us to pause and to rethink and think how we're going to do differently. And I want to share with you a story that happened to one of the veteran Chabad shliachim here in America. An amazing story that happened to him some years ago. Rabbi Nussi Garari is the Chabad rabbi. He opened the Chabad house many years ago at the university in Buffalo, New York. Now, nowadays, when you go around the United States, Chabad on campus is bursting. It's booming. Kids are coming like never before. It's a phenomenal success story. In fact, Chabad is one of the biggest providers of birthright. Proof is in the pudding. We bring more people to Israel every year than almost any other organization. Either we're number one or Hill's number one every year. We're literally bringing thousands of students. Why? Because the students are choosing to go with Chabad. It's their choice. And on campus today, Chabad is doing very well. But going back 40 years, when Rabbi Eliezrie came to the university in Buffalo, New York, it's not the warmest place in the universe, by the way. Buffalo is known for one thing, the Buffalo Bills, and it's not a very warm place. It's cold in northern New York State, not far from Niagara Falls. So we started the Chabad house there. It was difficult. It was challenging. Chabad is not like today. They say in Hebrew, Chabad is a firma. Chabad is, very well appreciated and accepted wherever you go. There's Baruch Hashem, a Chabad rabbi doing wonderful things. I just had a call from a friend of mine this morning, one of the heads of a major Jewish organization in the United States, and his son is serving in the army in Israel, which I told him is a very noble thing to do. And he tells me that every week the people from Chabad come to visit the soldiers, and they bring them food, and they raise their spirits. So wherever you go today, Baruch Hashem, in Dubai, Chabad is booming. We had services in Abu Dhabi on Rosh Hashanah, and Mitzvah Hashem, with God's help, on Yom Kippur again. In 3 locations in the Emirates, we had services. 2 in Dubai, because we didn't have a place for overflow, and also in Abu Dhabi. So if you want to go to shul in Dubai, we have where to take care of you. Preschool, Hebrew school, Sunnah Mikvah, a bunch of other things. But nevertheless, but in those days, when you came to the university, like you were a novelty. And he comes there, and it's Yom Kippur, and there's an interesting thing about working on campus. It's a seasonal business. In other words, when the students go home or they're on vacation, there's very few students around. And on that year, college was beginning a few days after Yom Kippur, and there was not too many students on campus. He figured maybe I should go to New York for Yom Kippur, and I'll have a minyan there. It'll be fine and wonderful, and I'll celebrate there. But then he said, you know what? Maybe I should stay here. It's a long drive to New York, 9 hours. It's a long Buffalo to New York is not around the corner. He decides I'm going to stay there, but he's got to get a minyan. How's he going to get a minyan in Buffalo? He doesn't have a community. All he has is the students, and the students are really not there. He decides to go to the local fraternity. I don't know what's in South Africa, but here at universities, we have fraternities, and these are like groups of people that live together in a big house. And there's Jewish fraternities. One is called ZBT, the other one's called AEPI, and they try to build a sense of Jewish community on campus. Now, to get into those fraternities, you have to be a pledge. You are there for a parole basis, a trial basis. And while you're there, you got to listen to everything the head of the fraternity tells you, who's called the master. So he goes to the master of the local Jewish fraternity, because he's also in fraternity in that area of the campus. The Chabad houses many times are located near the fraternities. And a lot of times we buy old fraternity houses and turn them into Chabad houses. So he decides to go to the head of the fraternity, and he says, listen, I need a minyan for Yom Kippur. He says, no problem. I got 9 pledges. He calls in the 9 pledges. He says, guys, you are going to be the minyan for Yom Kippur. So it's Yom Kippur morning, 9:30, 10 o'clock. They arrive at the Chabad house. Nussi Garari gets in the front. Rabbi Garari has his white kittel, has his talus, has his kapata. He goes to the front of the shul. It's him and the 9 students. Now, let's be very honest. They can daven as good as I could speak Swazi. I think in Swaziland, you have their own language. Afrikaner, I can't speak Afrikaner. They really didn't know what's going on, but they're stuck there. He's davening. He's standing in the front. He's leading the davening. They're sitting there not knowing exactly what's happening. And it goes on, and it comes to the Amida, the Shemona Esrei, the silent devotion. He gets up there to daven. He's going through it, and finally he's getting toward the end, and he hears a door slam. He finishes the Amida. He turns around. He sees they all left. What's he going to do? He needs a minyan. He takes his talus, he takes his kittel, he walks next door to the fraternity. He sees the guys are sitting around watching a football game. In America, it's not soccer. We're talking about American football. That's a religious experience here in this country. He sees them there, and he says, Chevra, the master said, you're the pledges. They trudge back to the Chabad house. He says it gets a little more interesting because on Musaf and Yom Kippur, we have Mishtachavim, you bow down. And if you read the readings of the story of the 10 martyrs, it gets a little better. They sit through the whole davening. And the davening, they're so relieved to go back. He davens as quick as he can. They're relieved to go back to the fraternity. He says, guys, one more thing. He says, we have Ne'ilah, the final service. You need to come back. The fast is over at 7 o'clock. 6 o'clock is Ne'ilah. I need you here. Okay? They say we're coming. And they're going to come. Comes 6 o'clock. 8 guys come back. He has no minyan. What's he going to do? 6 o'clock on Yom Kippur afternoon. The college is pretty empty. So he tells them, guys, you stay here. I'm going to go find a minion. He walks out of the Chabad house. He's wearing his talis. He's wearing his white kittel that we all wear on Yom Kippur, the white coat. He has his kapata underneath. He looks extremely Hasidic. And he walks on the streets of the fraternity and the university nearby, and he's trying to find a Jew. And he can't find anybody. He thinks to himself, there's one place that maybe there's a few students, because there's some students on campus. They're coming early to get ready to go to school. So they came a week early. They're in the dorms. They're home. Around. He decides to go to the cafeteria. He walks in the cafeteria. It's Yom Kippur afternoon, an hour before the fast is over. And he's looking for that Jewish face. And he sees a guy with a tray of food about to sit down to eat. And he says to him, are you Jewish? He says, yes. He says, do you know today's Yom Kippur? And this guy doesn't know too much about Yom Kippur. He's like a very assimilated Jew. You have to understand that South Africa is a remarkably traditional Jewish community. You have extreme high rates of Jewish education. In America, you have 10% of children going to Jewish day schools, 15%. In South Africa, you have 70, 80%. In America, we have an intermarriage rate of 72%. In the non-Orthodox in South Africa, it's much, much lower. You guys are a role model to us about what it is to be a strong Jewish community. You have very strong Orthodox shuls, beautiful places. I saw them. I was in Cape Town. I saw the shul there. It was absolutely stunning, built over 150 years ago, whatever. Unbelievable what you guys have, all of you have accomplished in South Africa. So now he says to him, could you help me out? So he begins to explain to him it's Yom Kippur. This guy knows there's an idea called Yom Kippur, but he doesn't know anything about it. He says, listen, I'm willing to come help you out, but could you give me 10 minutes or 5 minutes? I can finish my supper. So now we have this Meshugana situation. Here he is sitting in the cafeteria of the of the Chabad house of the university. Nussi Garari, Rabbi Garari, standing off to the side, his talis over his shoulders, his white kittel, and he's waiting for the guy to finish dinner. He schleps him back to the Chabad house. They daven Ilah. And what happened? That young man today is today a Jew who is fully observant, a Jew who has today probably by now Jewish grandchildren. But what is the point of the story? And this is what Rabbi Garari said that was so amazing and so interesting. Who expected the divine providence would be orchestrated for him to do something that he never dreamt of doing? Something we call it, there's a Hasidic expression called the Chatchila Rebbe. Goes back to the fifth Rebbe, that when you come to an obstacle in life, you have three choices. You can stop, you can go around it, or the Chatchila Rebbe, from beginning, you can go over the top. And what happens is when you're in a situation of stress, when you're in a unique situation, you do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. You break out of your norm. You break out of what you're used to, your regular kind of life. And would you imagine that a rabbi would walk into a cafeteria in Yom Kippur? Come on! Because he walked into that cafeteria on Yom Kippur, it became a transformational moment in his life. It became a very whole point of change. And because of that, it changed the life of that young man, which tells us something very important. We can walk around and say, oy vey, this corona, and always this. And listen, I know it's hard for everybody. I have grandchildren. I have 2 children in Australia, and they're beautiful grandchildren. I'd love to go for a short visit. Can't get on a plane. They won't let me in the country. Or if I go there, they'll put me in 2 weeks of quarantine. So by the time I leave, it's a Meshugana situation. Or we can say to ourselves, you know what? We're going through a very unique time. There is going to be something good that's going to come out of it. How do we go ahead and make good? One of the most interesting things about this is this Zoom situation today, that a rabbi in California can give a speech to Jews in Johannesburg, that somebody from Johannesburg can share their thoughts with people in California. It's connecting us together from all parts of the world. So let us, my friends, there's an old Hasidic saying, which means chaf good v'zayin good. If you think positive, it's going to be positive. To a large degree, it's what we're going to make out of this situation. There's a professor at Harvard who has a very interesting analogy. He says a guy goes into a bank, and he's in the bank for a few minutes, taking a few dollars out from the teller, and suddenly a bank robber comes in, and he tells everybody to get down. And the people are making a tumult, and he gives a shot. And our guy goes in the bank, he gets wounded on his arm. So the professor turns to the people at Harvard, and he says to them, listen, I want to ask you a question. Is this good or is this bad? She says, invariably, 70% of the people say, it's bad. It's bad. He got wounded. He came into a bank. There was a bank robbery. And 30% of the people said, it was a miracle. He was saved. It was good that he would, thank God his life was saved. We have to look for the good in our lives. We have to look for the positive. We have to look for the optimist. The glass is not half empty. It's half full. And we have to go and fill that glass the rest of the way. So let us hope and pray that we should have a year of blessing, a year of optimism, a year that we seize opportunities, a year that we break down the barriers that we tell ourselves we can't do. Because what usually holds us back more than anything else, it's not the outside, it's the inside. The biggest struggle in life is not climate change or not changing this or not the societal issues. It's the challenge we have to transform ourselves from within. We all have that dark part of ourselves that we're not so proud of. And we don't want to confront it. And we don't want to transform it. Comes Rosh Hashanah, comes Yom Kippur, comes the Aseret Shemei Tshuva, these powerful days. And it says, guess what? God is giving us the tools to transform ourselves to be better people. In two areas, the mitzvahs between us and our fellow man. And if God forbid we wrong somebody, we should go to them and make it right. And the mitzvahs that are between us and God. And all we have to do, as Maimonides explains, the Rambam writes, is we put ourselves in the same situation again, and we don't do that thing that was wrong, then our repentance is accepted. So let this be a year that we burst out. Let this be a year of miracles. Let this be a year that we look for optimism. And let this be a year that we break down our barriers and we find new senses of opportunity, a year of health, a year of happiness, and a year of optimism. A good to gebenchte year, a blessed, wonderful year, all the way from sunny California. If we have any questions or whatever, I'd love to hear from you people. I'm seeing myself right now in the Zoom, but it's a pleasure to talk to you.
You're also on Facebook and other platforms. Rabbi Eliezrie.
Unbelievable. So the whole world.
Yes, two questions. Number one, just a mundane question. You're in Orange County in California. How many Jews live in your district, in your area, in your state? We'd like to hear that. People would like to hear about the political situation at the moment in America. America seems so torn apart at the moment.
Well, let me answer let me do the first. The first is Orange County, where I live, has about 70,000 Jews, and Los Angeles, up the freeway, about an hour away, has probably 500,000. Orange County has many cities. There is one city called Irvine, which has a large concentration of South African Jews. We know that South Africans, when they left South Africa, they went to a few places. They went to Atlanta, they went to Toronto, they went to Irvine, San Diego, and also they went to Perth and Sydney and a bit in Australia. So there's a large group. In fact, we have two shuls in Irvine, Chabad of Irvine and another Orthodox shul, which are basically both started by South African Jews that gave them a very special sense of energy. So, and here we have about 80,000 Jews. We have about 15 community Chabad centers and another Orthodox shul or so. And then we have a day school, which we have a couple of day schools, but it's nowhere near the intensity of Jewish life that you have in South Africa. We have the level of observance is dramatically lower. The Jews who came to California were the ones who, if you look at all the studies about American Jewry, Jews are much more traditional on the East Coast than we're on the West Coast. The ones who came to the West Coast, many of them went away they left their family ties, they left their sense of tradition, and they're much less observant than the American Jew. What's so intriguing is that today we're seeing a phenomenal, when I came to Orange County, some 30 some odd years ago, there were 7 or 8 conservative temples. Now they're down to one viable congregation. The rabbis are there. It's a friend of mine. We may have our philosophical differences, but there's the big transition in American Jewish life today is that traditional American Jew that historically did not go to an Orthodox synagogue is now going to Chabad, and we're seeing that very true in our community.
Didn't I read that a conservative community closed down and gave the community and asked the congregants to join Chabad?
That's happening all over the country. That happened. There was a congregation that closed down. Here in Orange County, a bunch of synagogues closed. A lot of the people have come over to us. They may not be fully observant, but they're choosing to go to a more traditional environment. But we are seeing that transition all over the country. They've closed about 300-400 synagogues over the last 20 years, and we've opened about 500 Chabad centers. So the shift is moving in our direction to a large degree. In fact, there's an article coming out soon in an online magazine called Tablet, which is a very prestigious magazine, in about 3 weeks, which is going to, I haven't seen the article, but there's a professor of urban studies who wrote it, and basically arguing that there's going to be a major transition in Jewish life in America because Chabad is so creative and dynamic and poised that the growth is going to be in the Chabad sector.
So just go back to your community. How many people live in Orange County? How many in California?
Oh, in California, we probably have about 1 million Jews. In Orange County, we have about 70,000. In LA County, about 500,000, and 350,000 in the Bay Area, and probably another 125,000 in San Diego, and then in small communities all over the country. We have about 275 Chabad centers in California.
Very cool. What's your famous study in America? The Pew report. The
Pew report was done about 5-6 years ago, but it was very deeply flawed because it used the wrong. The interesting studies that are coming out right now, the Pew report is changing its methodology for the next study. The interesting studies that are coming out are being done by local Jewish federations. And what they're coming out with statistics is about 20% of all American Jews are involved with Chabad, and about 30 to 35% of Jews 35 and younger. It's a revolution going on in the Jewish world today.
With more and more people coming over to...
There's different trends. Jews are assimilating at a greater rate, and Jews who are engaged in Jewish life, a much larger percentage are coming to us than historically.
What are you as rabbis doing to fight the highest rate of assimilation in the world?
There's only one thing. It's called Jewish education, and you're in the trenches fighting Jew by Jew. Our problem is that we're rolling back 125 years of assimilation. But so we're seeing, again, these two opposites. You know, if you go today, you speak to people who run campus rabbis or people who run birthright trips, they tell you there's a remarkable difference between the young person today and 10 years ago. 10 years ago, they came and they knew something. Now they come and they almost know nothing. We're living in a time when there's a tremendous deficit of knowledge, but there's no instant solutions to change over a century of assimilation. It's a very difficult problem to solve. In South Africa, in Australia, to a large degree, where you have a much higher rate of Jewish education, and in South Africa also Jews are pushed inward by the society. Here in America, you can fully assimilate into the society. So fighting the battle is it's a daily battle. Like I have a young man who I have been to Israel 2 years ago, and I found out over Yom Kippur that he went to Israel now for a 10-month program. It's transformational in his life. He was sitting here wasting time, in my opinion. So, but it's a battle of one person. It's one at a time, and it's not easy. The interesting trend is that when I started in shlichus over some 40 years ago, people looked at us like we dropped in from a UFO, like a foreign place. Oh, he's cute, fiddler on the roof, a Chabad rabbi. It was all wonderful. And now we're just part of the fabric of Jewish life. That there's a fundamental change going on.
Is the peace treaty between the UAE, and I'm sure you're quite involved in that, in the UAE and Israel, has it brought a new pride to Jews in America?
Well, I must be very honest. I think the media here has subdued it to a large degree because they don't like the guy who made the peace treaty. I think that people who are attuned to Jewish life feel that it's a very important step forward, and I think it represents a fundamental shift in the politics of the Middle East because it's saying that the Palestinians are not the key anymore, but rather we have more important fish to fry. So I think it's a revolutionary moment. And because I've been in touch on a daily basis with the rabbi in Dubai, I've been hearing about the growth of Judaism in Dubai, which is something really remarkable, freedom and opportunity. I mean, so I think it's a very important step forward, but it's also dream driven. Countries aren't driven by feelings, they're driven by mutual interests. And they have a mutual interest, which is the threat of Iran, which I think is the most ominous threat facing world Jewry since Hitler.
You read this from here, you read the press and the news about America, it seems like it's divided beyond description.
Yeah, there's a very profound political divide here, which I find very troubling because I believe that you have to learn to agree to disagree with people that you don't share the same views. And I think it's very important to understand other people, but people have become so emotional with what point of view they have. I think they've lost a little bit the ability to have rational conversation. And that is, to me, a very dangerous thing because the concept of a democracy is that we leave the swords at the door and we sit around the table and we work out our differences according to a certain fundamental rules. And here in America, we're blessed with a country where democracy is the central value. As the Rebbe would always call America, Medina Shel Chesed, a country of compassion, and where the Constitution enshrined the protection of basic human rights, which was very, very important. The problem is when you only see your point of view and you're not willing to look at the point of view of the other, and you're so emotionally tied into your point of view, then it becomes dangerous. It becomes a risk to democracy. And the bigger risk is that when you're willing to use violence to advocate a position, then I think it's a breakdown of democracy because there's nothing wrong with disagreeing. But the idea of America was we left the swords at the door. And I'm hoping and praying that there will be some sense of healing and greater rationality. I don't think it's our role as Chabad Shluchim to be involved in the political process. But I think what we need to do is encourage people to learn to agree to disagree with dignity. That everyone said, I never disagree with people, I only disagree with ideas. And I think it's important to have that debate over ideas. But the problem we're seeing is that inability to have that debate in a kind of menschliche fashion, in a way of dignity. And that to me is what's fearful.
Just come back to this. Now, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because I want to end with this. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. People are asking, people have messed up in life. They're wallowing in guilt. What is your advice to people who've messed up and are dealing with...
First thing is they shouldn't wallow in guilt. That is the opposite of what we have always taught. We have to look. Wallowing in guilt is a very negative thing. We have to have the intellectual and the emotional and the spiritual courage to confront our weaknesses. And we all have our weaknesses. Let's be very honest. That's when we have wives, they tell us what our weaknesses are. But seriously speaking, we have mother-in-laws to tell us what our weaknesses are. We all have the points that we'd like to change. But we can walk around and saying, oh, yeah, I feel terrible about this and terrible about this and terrible about that. But Hasidic philosophy has a different worldview. And it says we need to accentuate the positive because it depends how you look at yourself and you look at another human being. If you see yourself as something which is evil and self-centered and narcissistic, then you're always going to focus on that. But if you realize that God created you for a special purpose and put you in this place and gave you this series of challenges, that means that you have the ability to overcome them. And it's a godly given gift. So realize your potential and rise to it. So it's a question of how you see yourself and how you see the world around you. And the same thing when you look at another person. You can look at the person, it's like if you come to shul and you got two guys sitting in the back of the room and they say, Yankel's here. He did this, he did that. Or he can say, oh, Yankel's here. He's such a wonderful person. It's a question of what we want to focus on and how we look at things. Like that story I told you about the guy in the bank. You can say, oy gewalt, I got wounded, or oy gewalt, I got saved. We have to look at ourselves and realize that if God went to the trouble to create us, and God created the first human being, Adam, as an individual, and later on that Chava, Eve, come along, that means that each one of us as individuals can have tremendous potential in this world and can be an unbelievable agent for change. And we have the ability to be that. So instead of wallowing in guilt and feeling bad about what we did, we should celebrate the divine gifts that are given to us and resolve to live life in a better way because we have the potential to do it. It's there. We just have to push ourselves a little bit and reach within ourselves. And sometimes to reach beyond our comfort level because, if we feel, my teacher in yeshiva, one of my teachers in yeshiva, Rameshkin Parsek, told me a very interesting thing. He says, how do you know when you make it, if what you're doing is in the right direction or the wrong direction? He says, usually if you feel struggle, you're going in the right way. Because the initial feeling of each person is to do what makes them feel good, or what's a little bit self-oriented, or a little bit narcissistic, or a little bit egocentric. But when somebody comes along and says, Yankel, I want you to do me a favor, and you don't want to do it, and you feel that struggle to do it, then you're going in the right way. So part of life is that struggle. Realize that struggle and to be a better person. And this is, by the way, antithetical to modern Western society. Western society says, be happy, feel good. Judaism says struggle is great and struggle to accomplish, and realize that God put you in the world for this struggle, and this struggle is a positive thing, and you have the potential to be a remarkably better person.
Beautiful. I've just got to digress for a minute. Your book that you wrote, which I've read, right, The Secret of Chabad, it became a world bestseller in the...
It did very well. It sold, in the Jewish world, it sold 20,000 copies, which is like the type 1%.
I will tell you that I once met the publishers of DC, one of the great publishers in America, and they told me that 5,000 non-fictional books is considered to be a success. So the book that you wrote, what prompted you to write it? And
what prompted me to write it, I was upset. I looked at how Jewish historians in two parts of the Jewish world looked at Chabad. The ones in the Orthodox world that I felt were, let's say, a bit revisionistic, and they would only write exactly the world the way they want to see it, usually in the classic Lithuanian yeshiva world, to exclude what the contributions of the Hasidic world were. And I also felt that some of the modern historians, in the academic world, also were ignoring Chabad. And I felt that they fundamentally misunderstood our contribution and what we were doing in this world. So I wanted to write a book. I didn't want to write a book like many others, we're wonderful, we did this, because the book I wrote is extremely heavily footnoted. And it's a book which it goes into the real guts, and it's really much more analytical. And I had a really remarkable story. Last year in October, I went to Brandeis University to see a friend of mine, Professor Jonathan Sarna, who wrote the book American Judaism, which is considered the great classic on American Jewish history. And we sat down to talk about, which I'll tell you in a moment, a new book that I'm writing. And he says, before we have the conversation, I need to do something. He says, I just re-edited my book, American Judaism. I said, yes, because it had come out 15 years earlier. He says, I changed much of the book, a bunch of things in the book because of you. And he gives me the new copy of the book with a beautiful inscription saying that his book was changed because of my book. So I wrote it number one was to set an historical record straight. Number two, I wanted the Jewish world and the broader society and ourselves to understand really what makes us tick. To be self-analytical is not an easy thing to do, but to delve into our guts and our kishkas, that should be understood. And as Chabad grows and becomes today, Chabad is today the mainstream of the Jewish world. So as Chabad grows and is today also the largest Jewish organization in the world, that people should understand who we are and what we really represent. And thank God, I hope it did well. And now I'm working on a new book, which is a biography of who I believe is a seminal figure in the 20th century Jewry, whose impact reaches into the 21st century, who's been almost ignored, which is the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, and who passed away in 1950. And the new book is called Undaunted, and it's about his life. And I'm working already on the third chapter. It's a major effort going on and moving forward. One of the things, by the way, Rabbi Mesinter, I discovered was a Farbrengen held for Yud Beis Tammuz, which celebrates the anniversary of the Rebbe's release from prison in 1927, held, I think, in the mid-1960s in South Africa, where some of the Chassidim were in Russia, and they're talking about their experience in Johannesburg. It's on YouTube. What?
I've heard it. I've heard it. Unbelievable that actually. It was in the 60s, and I remember it.
They're going back a little over 30 years.
Yeah.
They experienced it.
I'm sorry for jumping all over the place, but somebody's just asked a question. Are more American Jews looking to make Aliyah to Israel? And is that a good thing, a bad thing? Would like to hear your opinion.
First thing, I think there is some more considering, but you see, there's a very big difference between what I found striking when I went to South Africa, and I saw this also in Australia, is the Zionist tradition, the idea of connection to Israel between American Jewry and South African Jewry is very different. And because we don't feel an intense level of anti-Semitism, there is issues in this country, but it's nothing like the challenges that South African Jewry went to, is that there is an interest in Aliyah, but it's still very small. In fact, we saw about 2,000 Americans move to Israel every year. I've heard from Bushi Herzog, the chairman of the Jewish Agency, and I serve on the board of the Jewish Agency, that there is a greater interest in immigration from this country, but I'm still waiting to see that. I think some American Jews want to go. Some of it is also we're seeing another interesting shift in American Jewish life. Jews are moving out of urban cities like Los Angeles, like New York, because of the rise in crime, the riots that have gone on, the breakdown in government, and we're seeing, and also the cost of housing. We're seeing, for instance, a tremendous move of Jews to Florida. We're seeing Jews moving out of New York to Connecticut and New Jersey. We're seeing that kind of transition going on. I think there is an interest in Aliyah, but I don't think it's anywhere as strong as exists in France or South Africa or other countries, even though probably most of the Jews who wanted to make Aliyah from South Africa already went. But there's a stronger interest in France, but it's here in America. Maybe it's a little bit more than before. And I think one of our challenges, and I think it's a very important thing for us to work on, is to foster the connection between Jews and the homeland of the Jewish people and Israel. And we're doing that with Birthright. We're trying to do other programs in the same direction. I think it's a very important thing to do. But the reason that Jews are disconnected to Israel, and this is a real fundamental point, the difference between the American Jew and the South African Jew is the American Jew has no Jewish education. And what is the numbers, right, Mesinter in Johannesburg? What percentage of Jewish kids go to Jewish schools? 80%.
90%, 95%.
Okay, and by us, it's 10%. So that disparity is what's causing the disconnect of Jews. Because they're disconnected from Judaism, they're also disconnected from the homeland of the Jewish people. So what we need to do, it's not a question over the policies of the state of Israel, even though that's probably for some liberal elites. They don't agree with the Israeli policies, so they're making a big deal out of it. The real issue is the lack of, it's a few factors. Number one, it's the lack of understanding of the importance of what does it mean that Eretz Yisrael is a central aspect of Jewish identity. And number two, they don't feel a sense of threat, so they don't feel they need to run anywhere. There is some American Jews, where we are seeing Aliyah is in the Orthodox sector because they're much more engaged with Jewish life. So there's a strong sense of Aliyah. I think about 70% of Jews moving to Israel are Orthodox, even though they're only about 10 to 15% of the American population.
It's amazing. Rabbi Eliezrie, it has been absolutely intriguing listening to you. I loved it when you were here in the Capitol Hotel, if you remember correctly.
I had a great time. I want to tell you, if you're going to South Africa, Rabbi Mesinter is the biggest machnis orach. There's nobody who welcomes you in a better way. The guy turns up at the airport with food. He picks you up. He takes you around. I even was changing planes. I was going from the airport in Kruger. I was going back to Europe, and I had to change planes to Johannesburg. He sends a guy to the airport to make sure I have food on the flight up, going back to Europe. The guy, Emerz Hashem, when we finish the next book, we'll come back to South Africa. We'll make another book tour. We'll have a lot of fun. And by the way, let me just say, if you have any other historical information in South Africa, like that video from the 1960s, I'd love to see it about the previous Rebbe.
So I'll send you. So we'll connect you with that. But what I do want to say, when a celebrity comes to town, we like to look after them. I want to thank you for your time. On behalf of everybody, I want to wish you take this opportunity to wish you and all people participating
A good to Gesundheit year. We should have a year, my friends, of blessing, of Geula,
and the Mashiach immediately,
and Mashiach, and we should and health and Gesund for everybody, and a true year that we look and we find the goodness and the happiness and the positiveness in our lives. Good Yom Tov, everybody, and an easy fast.